The International Music Lounge was unusually lively that evening, filled with travelers, students, business people, and musicians who had wandered in after hearing the faint notes of a piano drifting through the street. The place had warm lights, soft leather seating, and a polished grand piano placed right in the center. It wasn't a formal stage, but people treated it like one, coming up one by one to play a song or two for fun. Among the crowd was a man known around the area for his bold playing style. He never introduced himself with his profession or background. Instead, he let the piano keys speak for him. His music was fast, loud, and proud, and he played with the kind of confidence that made everyone notice him the moment he sat down. That evening, after finishing a particularly showy piece, he stood up to applause and gave a playful bow. The audience enjoyed his energy, and he enjoyed their attention even more. He stepped aside but stayed close to the piano, leaning casually against it as if he owned it. A few minutes later, as the crowd settled again, the front door opened quietly. A woman entered the lounge, carrying a small bag and wearing a soft, calm expression. She had a gentle presence, the sort that didn't try to attract attention. Her clothing was simple, neat, and modest, and her steps were light, almost silent. She scanned the room, noticed the piano, and slowly approached the side of the crowd. She didn't push forward or announce herself. She simply stood in line behind a few others who were waiting for their turn to play. But her stillness itself made her noticeable. While others chatted or shifted anxiously, she remained quietly focused on the piano, her hands resting lightly in front of her. Her eyes softened every time someone played, as if she understood and appreciated every note. The confident pianist noticed her immediately. At first, he didn't think much of it. People came in and out all the time, but something about her calmness made him curious. She looked too composed, too unbothered, too different from the ordinary visitors who came excited or nervous to play. After two more people finished their turns, she stepped forward. She placed her small bag gently on a nearby chair and stood by the piano, waiting for permission. The lounge encouraged anyone to play, so nobody stopped her, but many people in the crowd glanced at her with mild curiosity. The confident pianist walked closer with a grin. He liked stirring things up, especially when he spotted someone who looked inexperienced. He enjoyed pushing beginners a bit, teasing them lightly, and watching how they reacted. "So," he said in a light, playful tone, "you're going to play next?" She turned to him and gave a small, polite bow. "If that's okay," she replied softly. Her voice was gentle, barely above a whisper, but steady. She didn't look shy. She looked respectful. "Of course it's okay," he chuckled. "Always good to have new people try. What kind of music do you play?" She hesitated for a moment and then answered, "Just a little. I learned when I was younger." Her modest answer made him smile even wider. People who said they played a little usually struggled at the piano or could only manage something simple. The audience had seen many visitors like that, a person wandering in, trying a piece halfway, laughing nervously, and walking away embarrassed. The confident pianist assumed she would be the sane dot. He tapped the top of the grand piano lightly with his hand. "Tell you what," he said with a playful spark in his voice. "Why don't we make it fun? How about a small challenge? A friendly piano duel?" A few people around them murmured in excitement. Everyone loved a duel in the lounge, even when it was just for entertainment. It added drama, something to talk about for the rest of the night. The woman blinked slowly, thinking about his words, then gave another graceful bow. "If you like," she replied. There was no arrogance, no fear, only politeness. That puzzled him for a moment. He expected hesitation or surprise. Instead, she seemed calm. Too calm, but instead of reconsidering, the challenge made him even more energized. "All right then," he said, clapping his hands cheerfully. "I'll play first, and then you show us what you've got." She nodded gently and stepped back, folding her hands in front of her. For a moment, she closed her eyes, breathing slowly, as if centering herself. The man sat at the piano again with flair, cracking his knuckles dramatically and stretching his fingers. The audience gathered closer. Some recorded the moment on their phones, not expecting anything extraordinary, but enjoying the atmosphere. He began to play. His fingers flew confidently across the keys, producing quick runs, bold chords, and powerful transitions. He chose a piece he knew would impress the audience, something that showcased his technical skills. He made sure every move, every flourish, was visible to everyone watching. People nodded and clapped along, enjoying his showmanship. His playing wasn't emotional, but it was loud and bright, the kind that filled the room with energy. When he finished the final note, he lifted his hands with a flourish and received enthusiastic applause. He looked very pleased with himself. He stood up and gestured to the woman with a sweeping motion. "Your turn," he said warmly. The challenge was set, and people waited, expecting something simple, maybe gentle, maybe even slightly clumsy. She stepped forward silently. Her posture remained straight, her movements soft and deliberate. She didn't try to imitate his flair or confidence. Instead, she took a deep breath and sat down slowly, placing her hands on her lap for a moment. The room felt strangely quiet. No one knew why, but something about her calmness made everyone else fall silent too. She lifted her hands and placed them above the keyboard, but did not begin playing right away. She let her fingertips hover over the keys, testing the distance, feeling the subtle texture of the ivory. The confident pianist watched closely, still smiling, but with a hint of curiosity now. She seemed too comfortable at the piano for someone who used to play a little. He folded his arms and leaned against a table, waiting to see what she would do. As she sat there, the lights above the piano reflected gently on her face. Her expression softened even more, and the slightest hint of a deeper emotion flickered in her eyes. Something unspoken, something from a long time ago, but she didn't show any nervousness. She didn't rush. She didn't try to match his energy. Instead, she let the silence carry the weight of anticipation. Finally, after what felt like a long breath shared by the entire room, she pressed the first key. It was a single soft note, but the quality of the sound surprised everyone. It was warm, full, and expressive, nothing like the loud, showy style they had just heard. Her fingers rested on the keyboard, but her shoulders relaxed naturally, her posture perfect. She didn't force the music. She let it flow. The way she positioned her hands, the lightness of her touch, the precision of her movement, it all hinted at years of training that she had never mentioned. People exchanged glances, leaning in a little closer. Something felt different. The confident pianist straightened subtly, sensing a shift he couldn't explain. Before she continued playing, she looked up at the keys for a moment with an expression that almost seemed nostalgic, as if the piano reminded her of a world she hadn't visited in a long time. The crowd waited, holding their breath without realizing it. She touched the keys again, and the real story began. When she pressed the second note, it felt as if the entire room leaned closer without thinking. The sound was gentle but strong in its own way, carrying a warmth that made the space feel suddenly smaller, as if everyone had moved into a quiet world where only the piano existed. No one had expected that. Even those who had been chatting or scrolling through their phones lifted their heads and paid attention. The woman did not rush. Her hands moved slowly at first, almost like she was reacquainting herself with an old friend. Her fingers glided over the keys with a softness that didn't come from uncertainty, but from familiarity, like someone touching something precious after a long time. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the feeling settle, and then began to play with a smoother, clearer flow. each note connected to the next like a ribbon unfolding. There was no showmanship, no exaggerated gestures, no unnecessary movements. Nothing about her performance was loud or flashy. Instead, her style was calm, elegant, and surprisingly deep. It felt as if she was telling a story without using words. The audience, who had moments ago cheered for the loud and confident playing of the man, grew completely silent. Even the staff members behind the counter paused, watching her with wide eyes. People sensed that something unexpected was happening, something real. The confident pianist, standing near the piano with crossed arms, felt his eyebrows rise slightly. He had expected a simple tune, maybe a children's melody or a slow piece played with shaky fingers. But this was different. He uncrossed his arms slowly and leaned forward a little, trying to understand what he was hearing. Her technique was clean, almost too clean to belong to someone who had stopped playing long ago. Her timing was steady, and her sense of expression was something he couldn't ignore. She continued playing, letting her hands float across the keyboard in smooth arcs. Her left hand moved with steady control, holding a strong foundation, while her right hand created delicate patterns that shimmered through the air. The piece wasn't overly dramatic, but it was filled with feeling. Even though it was simple, it carried a feeling that made people feel connected to it. Some listeners felt calm, others felt touched, and a few couldn't explain what they were feeling, only that something inside them had softened. A man near the back whispered to his friend, "She said she only learned a little? That can't be true." His friend nodded, but didn't take his eyes off her. "She plays like someone who lived inside music for years." But the woman didn't seem aware of the attention. She didn't play to impress. She played because in that moment, the piano was the only thing she wished to communicate with. Her gentle expression remained unchanged, focused, yet peaceful. Absorbed in the sound she was creating. As she moved into a slightly more emotional section, her fingers began to flow faster. Still, every movement was controlled, polished, and natural. She didn't lift her hands too high or strike the keys too hard. Her style was minimal, but powerful in its softness. Even the confident pianist's expression began to shift from amusement to curiosity, then from curiosity to something more serious. He recognized the signs, the kind only musicians understood. The way she weighted each note, the small hesitation before a resolution, the subtle changes in touch. These were not things an occasional player could do. They belonged to someone trained, well trained, someone who had put years into learning, someone who breathed music. He tilted his head slightly, his smile fading just a little. Something in her calm posture bothered him, not in a negative way, but in a way that made him question his assumptions. Meanwhile, the audience felt more drawn in. A young girl near the front rested her chin on her hands, staring at the woman with admiration. A couple holding drinks stood still, forgetting to take a sip. Even a small group of tourists who had been laughing a moment before became silently focused, unable to look away. The lounge owner, who rarely left the counter, stepped out to watch as well. He had seen many performances before, some good, some impressive, but the way this woman played made him pause. It wasn't just skill. It was something more. Something that reached people in a deeper way. The woman's expression softened even further as her fingers glided into a gentle high section. Her eyes opened halfway, as if she was seeing something far beyond the room. The notes sparkled lightly, like raindrops hitting a still lake. There was a sense of emotion in her playing that didn't rely on being loud, dramatic. It was honest, it was personal. Those watching could feel that. Even if they didn't understand music, the confident pianist swallowed quietly. He recognized that type of expression, the kind that came from someone remembering something important through the music. She wasn't performing for the audience. She was speaking through the notes, sharing a moment from her past. That was something he didn't often see. He usually relied on showmanship, on speed and volume. But she didn't need any of that, Dot. The woman moved into a warmer, richer part of the piece, something that felt full and emotional. Her hands flowed like water, creating a sound that filled the room without ever becoming overwhelming. It felt like she was telling a story about something gentle, maybe something bittersweet but beautiful. A few people exchanged confused looks. How could someone play like this and still say she only knew a little? It made no sense. The confident pianist felt the same confusion growing inside him. A part of him wondered whether she might have been joking earlier. Or maybe she meant something else. Maybe she didn't want to talk about her past. She continued with a slight shift in tempo, smooth and controlled. Not a single part of the piece felt rushed or forced. She played with ease, with natural grace. It was clear that the piano wasn't something she struggled with. It was something she understood deeply. Her fingers moved with a soft certainty that came from years of repetition, years of practice, years of living inside music. And it made the confident pianist realize something he didn't expect to feel. He had underestimated her. Badly, Dot, she finally reached the end of the piece, slowing down gently, letting the notes settle like falling snow. The last chord hovered beautifully in the room for a moment, before fading into silence that no one clapped right away. Not because they didn't want to, but because they were stunned. The room felt suspended, as if time had paused for a second. Then, slowly, applause began soft at first, then louder, as if people were waking from a dream. A few people stood up. Others cheered. Someone near the back even whistled. It wasn't chaotic applause. It was heartfelt, full of admiration. The woman looked down shyly and gave a small bow from her seated position. She seemed almost embarrassed by the attention, as though she had done something ordinary. She placed her hands gently on her lap again and took a slow breath. The confident pianist stepped forward, unable to hide the surprise on his face. He had expected something simple, maybe cute. But what he got was someone who played with a level of skill that rivaled his own, perhaps even surpassed it. He couldn't deny it. He walked a little closer to her as the applause continued. There was no teasing smile on his face anymore. Instead, he looked thoughtful, studying her carefully. She noticed him approaching and stood up politely, stepping away from the piano. "You?" he began, stopping halfway through his sentence. He tried again. "You play beautifully." She bowed gently. "Thank you." He felt something heavy sitting in his chest, a mix of hesitation and curiosity. He wasn't used to being outmatched, especially by someone who barely spoke and carried such a quiet presence. He cleared his throat softly. "That didn't sound like someone who plays a little," he said. Keeping his tone light but honest, Dot, she looked down for a moment, then replied in her quiet voice, "It has been many years. But I used to play more." Her answer wasn't defensive, just simple. But it didn't satisfy him. He wanted to know more. Who was she really? Where did she learn? Why did she stop? The crowd continued watching them, wondering the same things. The lounge owner stepped closer with a smile. "That was wonderful," he told her. "You're welcome to play here any time." She bowed again, humbly, not expecting such praise. Meanwhile, the confident pianist felt something he didn't often feel, a touch of insecurity mixed with curiosity. Her calmness made him feel unsettled, but in an oddly inspiring way. He wasn't angry or embarrassed. He was fascinated. He opened his mouth as if to ask another question, but she gently gathered her small bag and stepped back from the piano. She didn't look like she was running away, just quietly withdrawing. Before she turned to leave, she looked at him briefly, offering a soft smile that didn't boast, didn't challenge, didn't brag. It was a nice challenge. She said kindly, "Dot, and with that simple sentence. She turned and walked toward an empty table, leaving him standing there. Unsure of what to say next, the audience whispered among themselves, replaying her performance in their minds. But the confident pianist only had one thought. Who was this woman really, and how had he almost missed recognizing someone with that kind of gift? The woman sat quietly at the small table near the corner of the lounge, her hands folded around a warm cup of tea she had just ordered. The applause had faded, but people were still whispering about her performance, glancing in her direction with a mix of admiration and curiosity. She didn't seem bothered by the attention, nor did she bask in it. Instead, she looked calm, almost peaceful, as if playing the piano had released something inside her that had been locked away for a long time. The confident pianist, however, wasn't nearly as calm. He stood near the piano, pretending to fix the bench height, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. He felt a strange tightness in his chest, not jealousy, not anger, but a feeling he couldn't name. Her playing had touched him in a way he wasn't expecting. It had humbled him, and that was not something he experienced often. He finally took a breath and walked toward her table. His steps were slower than usual, less showy and more controlled. Each step felt like he was approaching something he didn't fully understand. When he reached her table, he paused for a moment, unsure of whether he should speak or turn around. She looked up at him with soft eyes, surprised but welcoming. "Do you mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. She nodded and gestured to the empty chair across from her. He sat down carefully, folding his hands on the table. For the first time that evening, he didn't know what to do with him. "You really surprised me," he said honestly. "When you got up to play, I thought you would do something simple. But your playing, it was on another level." She looked down at her cup, gently turning it in her hands, the steam rising between them. "Thank you," she said softly. "It has been a long time since I played in front of people." He leaned forward slightly, studying her expression. "You said you learned when you were younger. But that kind of skill doesn't disappear. You must have had serious training." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the tea swirl inside the cup, as if the memory she was reaching for sat somewhere inside the liquid. "I practiced every day for many years," she admitted. "Music was my whole life for a long time." "Then why did you stop?" he asked, genuinely curious. Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. It was a small movement, but he noticed it. She let a few seconds pass before answering. "Life changed," she said simply. "And sometimes when life changes, music becomes quiet for a while." Her words were gentle, but carried a weight he didn't try to push against. He sensed there were things she wasn't ready to say. He respected that the lounge buzzed softly around them, the sound of conversations and clinking glasses filling the space, but their small corner felt separate from it all. He looked at her hands, elegant, steady, the hands of someone who had shaped music for years. "You know," he began, scratching lightly at the table's edge, "I thought I knew what good playing was. I thought speed and power made a performance strong. But the way you played, it wasn't loud, but it hit deeper. I could feel it." She lifted her eyes slowly, surprised by his sincerity. "Music can say many things," she replied. "Sometimes the quiet parts speak the loudest." He exhaled, almost laughing at how true that felt after hearing her play. "I think I forgot that," he said. "I've been playing for attention, for applause, for fun. But when I heard you, it reminded me why I started playing in the first place." She smiled gently, the expression soft and warm. "Everyone starts with a feeling," she said. "But feelings change. And that's all right." He nodded, appreciating her calmness. He wasn't used to people who spoke like this, without bragging, without rushing, without trying to impress. She was different. After a moment, he asked, Would you play again tonight? She shook her head softly. Not tonight. He felt a strange disappointment, but understood. She seemed like someone who didn't play unless she felt something, and forcing her would ruin what made her music special. Would you let me ask you one more question? He said. She nodded politely. Earlier, when you played, it felt like you were remembering something. Is that true? Her eyes moved toward the piano, still shining under the warm lights. She let out a soft breath. Yes, she whispered. It reminded me of someone who taught me how to feel the music, not just play it. There was emotion in her voice, not heavy, but gentle, like a memory that brought both comfort and sadness. Is that person still in your life? He asked carefully. She shook her head lightly. No, but their lessons stayed with me. He felt a quiet ache for her, though he didn't even know the story. He didn't need the details to understand that her music came from a place of love and loss. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat with the soft music playing in the background and the distant buzz of people around them. Then the lounge owner approached their table with a friendly smile. You played beautifully, he said to her. People are still talking about it. She bowed her head politely. Thank you for letting me play. You're welcome any time, he replied warmly before returning to the counter. The man watched her quietly as she lifted her cup again. He felt something in his chest, a mix of admiration and respect that he wasn't used to feeling so strongly. He wasn't looking at her as a rival anymore. He was looking at her as someone who had shown him something about himself. You know, he said softly, I don't think I'll forget the way you played tonight. She looked at him with gentle eyes. I won't forget it either, she said. It felt good to play again after so long. He smiled. It was a small smile, but genuine. A new musician stepped up to the piano in the distance, their playing light and cheerful. People clapped along, and the lounge regained its usual energy. But at their table, the moment still felt quiet. Do you want another tea? He asked, noticing her cup was nearly empty. She shook her head politely. No, thank you. I should go soon. He straightened a little surprised. Already? Yes, she said softly. I didn't plan to stay long tonight. He felt a small pang of disappointment. He didn't want the conversation to end. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, but he sensed that pushing would not be right. She was gentle but private. She stood up and picked up her small bag, bowing slightly to him. Thank you for the challenge, she said kindly. He stood as well, returning a respectful bow of his own. Thank you for accepting it. She smiled, a smile that held warmth, but also a hint of distance. Like someone who knew how to stay connected and separate at the same time. As she walked toward the exit, he watched her carefully, unsure if he would ever see her again. Part of him hoped she would return. Another part knew she might not. Just before she stepped out, she paused and turned around. Her eyes met his from across the lounge. Your music has energy, she said softly. Don't lose the joy in it, just listen to your heart a little more. And with that gentle advice, she slipped out into the night. He stood there, frozen for a moment, her words echoing in his mind. Then he slowly returned to the piano, placing his hand on the cool surface of the instrument. The room felt different now. He felt different. He sat down and pressed a single key. The sound seemed softer, deeper than before. He closed his eyes, letting the echo linger. For the first time in a long while, he listened not to the audience, not to his own pride, but to the quiet place inside him that he had ignored. And as the notes settled in the air around him, he realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. He woke up before his alarm that morning, something that almost never happened. His mind was already running, replaying the sound of their duet from the previous day. It lingered like a warm echo in his memory, as if the music refused to fade. He got dressed quickly and left home earlier than usual, almost afraid he would somehow make her wait. When he arrived at the studio, he found her standing outside the door, holding her small notebook in her hands. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. Her expression softened slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. It was enough to tell him she wasn't surprised to see him early. They entered the studio together, the hallway still dim and silent. Inside the practice room, the air felt calm, with the faint scent of polished wood and old sheet music. She placed her notebook on top of the piano and waited quietly, giving him time to settle. For a moment, they simply sat there in silence, both expressionless but not uncomfortable. There was something unspoken between them, now something gentle, steady, and hard to describe. He asked her if she wanted to continue their duet from yesterday. She shook her head softly, then opened her notebook and showed him a page filled with handwritten music. The notes looked carefully drawn, each mark precise. It wasn't a full piece more like fragments of a melody. She explained that it was something she had started composing recently, but never finished. She thought they could work on it together. The idea surprised him. He had never tried composing with someone else before, especially not with someone who played so gracefully. But the fact that she trusted him enough to share her unfinished tune made him feel unexpectedly honored. He took a moment to study the notes. The melody was delicate, quiet, almost shy. It was clearly her style, soft touches, emotional turns, but there were empty spaces too, places where she had left room for something more. He asked if she wanted him to play it first. She nodded, folding her hands in her lap as she watched. He played through the melody slowly. The room filled with a gentle sound, each note floating softly. He could sense her listening carefully, noticing every tiny detail. When he finished, she leaned closer and pointed to a part she hadn't completed. She gestured for him to try something there. He hesitated, unsure what would match her style. But she waited patiently, her gaze calm. So he added a few extra notes, adjusting them again and again until they blended smoothly with her melody. She listened, then offered a small nod, clear approval. Together, they continued shaping the piece bit by bit. Sometimes she added a phrase, sometimes he did. Sometimes they both played at the same time, experimenting with harmony. The more they worked, the more natural it felt, as if the music guided them instead of the other way around. The studio filled with a soft, back-and-forth rhythm, her quiet suggestions, his gentle adjustments, their shared silences. Even when they paused to think, it didn't feel like an interruption. It felt like part of the process. During one of the quiet moments, he asked how long she had been composing. She looked down, thinking. She said she started writing music when she was little. Her grandfather encouraged it, telling her to write down anything she felt, even if it didn't make sense at first. She added that she never showed her compositions to anyone until now. He blinked in surprise. Anyone? She nodded once. He looked at the notebook again, suddenly aware of how personal it must be to share it. He told her he felt honored, and she lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing the edge of the notebook lightly. They continued composing for another hour. The unfinished melody slowly took shape, transforming into something fuller and richer. It wasn't perfect, but it had a warmth that came from both of them. He felt proud, but more than that, he felt connected to the music and to her. When they reached the final part of the tune, she asked him to try repeating the opening melody, but with softer chords underneath. He tried it, and when he played the last note, she exhaled softly, as if relieved. She said it felt complete now. He couldn't stop smiling. Somehow, they had created something meaningful together. She closed her notebook gently and placed it on her lap. Instead of putting the piano cover down as she usually did, she remained seated, her eyes drifting toward the window where the morning sun filtered in. He asked her if something was on her mind. She hesitated, her fingers curling slightly. But after a moment, she spoke slowly. She said there was an event coming up, a small local music gathering. It wasn't a competition, just a casual event where musicians played and shared pieces. She had been invited to perform, but hadn't accepted yet. He asked why not. She stayed silent at first, then admitted that she didn't like drawing attention. She preferred quiet places, small practice rooms like this one. Performing in front of people, even a small crowd, made her nervous. He understood that feeling well. He had been on stage many times, but each time still brought a knot to his stomach. He told her that nerves were normal, and even the best performers felt them. She listened, but her eyes showed doubt. Then she surprised him by asking if he would go with her, only if she accepted the invitation. The question stunned him for a moment. He didn't expect her to ask for company. She wasn't someone who leaned on others easily. The fact that she trusted him enough to do so made something warm settle in his chest. He agreed, trying not to sound too eager. She nodded softly, then looked down at her notebook as if gathering courage. After a quiet pause, she said she would accept the invitation. He felt a sudden spark of excitement, not just for the event, but for the idea of seeing her perform again. The thought of hearing her gentle, emotional playing in a quiet hall felt special. They practiced a bit more, switching from composing to simple warm-up pieces. At one point, he accidentally played a wrong note. He winced, but she gave a tiny laugh, soft, almost hidden. It was the first time he heard her laugh clearly. It lasted only a moment, but he found himself wanting to hear it again. As the morning ended, they packed their things slowly. Before leaving the room, she paused and looked at him. She said thank you, simple words, but her voice carried a quiet sincerity. He nodded, and they walked out together. The days that followed moved with calm rhythm. They met each morning, working on their composition and practicing for her upcoming performance. He noticed she grew more comfortable each day. Her playing became more expressive, her movements less rigid. Even her silence felt different, not guarded, but peaceful. Sometimes she shared small thoughts, little things about her grandfather, her early lessons, or the melodies she loved. They weren't dramatic stories, just small pieces of her life she offered slowly. Like petals opening one by one, he found himself sharing more true memories of his own early struggles. The time he almost quit music, and the teachers who pushed him to keep going. She listened with quiet empathy, and he realized he had never spoken this openly about his journey before. One morning, after they finished practicing, she handed him her notebook. She said she wanted him to keep it for a while. He looked at her in surprise. She explained that she wanted him to study the unfinished melodies in it. Maybe he could help complete more of them later. He accepted the notebook carefully, almost reverently. Holding it felt like holding a piece of her world. She bowed slightly, then turned toward the door. But as she reached the hallway, she paused and looked back, giving him a tiny, almost shy smile. That small smile stayed in his mind the entire rest of the day. As the evening came, he sat at his piano at home and opened her notebook. He flipped through the pages slowly, marveling at the honesty in each melody. Some were bright, some were sad, some were simple and unfinished. But every one of them carried her gentle touch. He spent hours playing through them, adding small adjustments where he felt something missing. He didn't want to change her music, only help it breathe a little more. When he finally closed the notebook, he realized how deeply her presence had grown in his life. It had only been a short time since they met, yet he felt as though they had known each other much longer. With the music event approaching, he could feel a quiet anticipation building. That wasn't just about the performance. It was about what could happen next. and how the melody they were creating together, both in music and in life, was only beginning. He woke up earlier than usual on the morning of the event, though he had barely slept. His mind kept going over the past days, their long hours of practice, the careful way she shaped her melodies, the quiet trust she placed in him. He didn't know exactly why it mattered so much, but it did. Every step of this journey had started feeling personal, meaningful in ways he couldn't quite name. He prepared slowly, wanting everything to be just right. He wasn't the one performing tonight, but he felt a strange nervousness as if he were. After getting ready, he took a deep breath, grabbed the notebook she had lent him, and stepped outside. The streets were calm, washed with early morning light. He walked to the studio with steady steps, rehearsing the soft encouragement he wanted to give her. He wondered if she slept at all. He wondered if she felt even a fraction of the nerves he did. When he reached the studio, he found her already there, standing near the piano with her hands loosely clasped. She turned when she heard him, and her expression softened with quiet relief. For a moment, they didn't need words. They simply greeted each other with a slight nod. He handed her the notebook, telling her he went through every page again last night. She blinked once, curiosity flickering in her eyes. He said he made a few small notes, nothing big, just gentle suggestions where he felt something might grow. She carefully opened the notebook and paused at one of the pages he had marked. She played the melody softly, tracing his suggested notes. Then she looked at him with a small, appreciative nod. He exhaled, glad she wasn't bothered by his changes. He knew how personal her compositions were. The fact that she trusted him with them still amazed him. They sat together at the piano, practicing quietly for an hour. She focused most on the piece she would perform tonight, the one they finished together. Each time she played, he noticed how her hands trembled slightly at the beginning, though her playing never wavered. It reminded him that even the strongest people feel fear in moments that matter. When she finished the piece, she placed her hands on her lap, breathing out softly. He looked at her and asked if she felt ready. She didn't answer immediately. She stared at the keys, as if the right words were hidden between them. Finally, she said she was nervous, but also ready. Ready in a way she hadn't felt before. He told her that being nervous was normal, but she nodded before he even finished, as if she already understood. She wasn't seeking reassurance. She just needed to hear it spoken out loud. They packed up slowly, not wanting the morning to end too soon. As they walked out of the studio, sunlight fell gently across her face, making her expression softer than usual. She glanced at him and asked if he would stay close during the event. He promised he would. The small performance hall was located in a quiet part of the city, surrounded by trees with small lanterns hanging from their branches. The event wasn't large, just a simple gathering where musicians shared their pieces with each other. But to her, it was a step into a world she avoided for years. When they arrived, she paused at the entrance. People were setting up inside, adjusting microphones, tuning instruments, talking quietly among themselves. The gentle hum of activity drifted out into the cool air. He looked at her, noticing the slight stiffness in her shoulders. She wasn't trembling, but her breathing changed. He asked if she wanted to take a moment outside. She nodded. They stepped aside, near a corner where a soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. She took a slow breath, then another. He stood close, offering silent support. After a minute, she turned toward him and said she would be fine. Her voice was quiet but steady. Inside, the hall was warm with soft lighting. The seats were arranged in a wide semicircle around the stage. Musicians chatted among themselves, but the atmosphere remained relaxed. Nothing about it was intimidating, but he knew that fear doesn't always match the size of the room. They found a seat close to the side of the stage. She placed her notebook on her lap, holding it like something familiar, something safe. When the event began, A host introduced each performer casually. A guitarist played a gentle tune first. Then a violinist shared a lively melody. The audience responded with polite claps, enjoying the simplicity of the gathering. He glanced at her occasionally. She watched each performer quietly, her gaze steady. But her hands remained clasped tightly, as if holding on to her nerves. When they announced her name, she froze for a fraction of a second. He felt her worry instantly, even though she didn't show it on her face. He leaned toward her slightly and whispered that she could take her time. She nodded once, stood up slowly, and walked toward the stage. He watched as she climbed the small wooden steps carefully. She looked smaller under the soft stage lights, yet something about her posture remained dignified. She sat at the piano, placed her notebook beside her, and rested her hands gently on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. The room became silent, waiting. Then she began. The first notes drifted softly through the hall. The melody was gentle, almost like a secret being whispered. She played with a tenderness that pulled everyone closer. The audience leaned in, captivated by the quiet emotion in her playing. He watched her closely from his seat. She wasn't just performing a piece of music. She was opening a window to her inner world, one she usually kept closed. Every movement of her fingers was filled with sincerity. Every pause carried meaning. People in the room seemed to forget they were at an event. They sat still, listening with full attention. Even the other musicians, who often critiqued quietly in their heads, simply watched Dot as the melody moved into the part he helped her finish. He could hear the harmony of their combined effort. It felt both familiar and new, as if the music had grown beyond what they originally imagined. When she reached the final note, the hall remained silent for a moment. Then a soft wave of applause rose steady, warm, genuine. She bowed gently, her expression calm but touched by the response. Dot, as she walked back to her seat, her steps were lighter. She sat down beside him quietly. He congratulated her softly, and she responded with a small, grateful nod. Throughout the rest of the event, she seemed more relaxed. She even smiled faintly when another musician praised her performance during a short intermission. Her usual quietness was still there, but the tension had loosened. After the event ended and people began packing up, she stayed seated for a moment, looking at the piano as the lights dimmed. He asked her what she was thinking about. She said she felt lighter. She had always feared performing, but now she realized that sharing music didn't have to be frightening. It could be comforting. He told her he was proud of her. She lowered her gaze slightly, and for a moment he thought she might brush off the compliment the way she usually did. But instead, she whispered a soft thank you, her voice gentler than he'd ever heard. They walked out into the night air together. The lanterns were glowing faintly, casting warm circles of light on the ground. She held her notebook close, and her steps were slow, as if she didn't want the evening to end yet. He asked if she wanted to take a short walk before heading home. She nodded without hesitation. They walked along the quiet street, listening to the distant sounds of the city. She spoke softly about how the performance felt, how her hands stopped shaking halfway through, how she thought of her grandfather's teachings, how she let the music guide her instead of fear. He listened to every word. It was rare for her to speak so openly, and he didn't want to interrupt. When she finished, he told her she played beautifully, not just technically, but emotionally. She looked ahead, her expression thoughtful. After a moment, she said something unexpected. She said she was glad she met him. She said it quietly, almost as if unsure how the words would be received. He stopped walking for a moment, surprised. When she realized he stopped, she turned back with a faint hint of worry. He quickly assured her that he felt the same, that meeting her had changed something in him. She relaxed at his words, and a soft smile emerged, the kind that didn't need explanations. They continued walking, the night surrounding them with cool air and soft light. Both of them knew that something had shifted between them tonight, not dramatic or loud, but deep and genuine. When they finally reached the corner where their paths separated, she paused. She looked at him with the same gentle expression she had worn on the stage, the one filled with quiet strength. She said she would see him tomorrow. He nodded, feeling a warmth settle in his chest. As she walked away, he realized that the music they created together wasn't just a melody anymore. It was becoming a part of their story, and that story was still growing, note by note. The room was still settling after everything that had happened, but the energy around the piano felt completely different now. People who had been laughing, chatting, and moving around earlier were quieter, almost like they didn't want to disturb something precious that had just taken place. Aiko sat with her hands resting lightly on her lap, and even though she looked calm on the outside, something gentle yet strong seemed to glow from her. It was as if she had opened a door inside herself during her performance, and now she was letting the rest of the world see a piece of her heart she had kept hidden for a long time. Hideo stood a few steps away, but he didn't look like the same man who had walked up to the piano with confidence and a playful challenge. Moments ago, he had been the loudest one in the room. Now he looked humbled, quieter, almost reflective. He kept glancing at Aiko with a mixture of respect, admiration, and confusion, as though he was trying to understand how he could have so badly misjudged someone who carried such deep talent. The audience still hadn't moved much. Some people seemed lost in thought, others were whispering in soft voices, and a few were wiping their eyes. Aiko's music had reached people in a way they hadn't expected. It wasn't just skill. It was honesty. It was vulnerability. It was the kind of performance that reminded people why music had the power to connect strangers. A gentle voice was the first to break the silence. It came from an older man sitting near the front. He leaned forward, resting his hands on his cane. "Young lady," he said softly, "that was one of the most beautiful performances I have ever heard in my life." Aiko bowed her head slightly, showing gratitude without being dramatic. She didn't seem used to praise, and it appeared she didn't know what to do with the sudden wave of admiration surrounding her. She offered the man a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I am glad it reached you." The room seemed to exhale. People nodded. Someone else whispered, "It didn't just reach us. It stayed with us." Hideo finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. He wasn't trying to gather attention like before. He looked uncertain, almost shy. "Excuse me," he said to Aiko. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Aiko looked up at him, her expression neutral but kind. She nodded. Hideo lowered his voice so others couldn't hear easily. "I misjudged you. I thought this was just a fun challenge, and I didn't realize who you really were. I'm sorry if I was rude or disrespectful." Aiko studied his face for a moment. His apology was sincere, and she could see he wasn't trying to save face. Something in him had changed. His pride wasn't leading him anymore. His heart was. "You were not rude," she said softly. "You were playful. We all make assumptions." Hideo let out a relieved breath. "Still, I won't forget what I heard today. You reminded me what music is supposed to be." Aiko smiled politely, but didn't respond to that. Compliments seemed to make her shy, and she wasn't eager to talk about herself. The lounge owner approached next, his steps quick but respectful. He had been watching everything, and he looked beyond excited. "I hope you won't mind me asking this," he began carefully, "but would you be interested in playing here again? Maybe in an event? Or even just whenever you feel like it? People would love to hear you." Aiko hesitated. She looked down at her hands, thinking. Her fingers moved slightly, like they remembered the keys and were still telling her something. "I am not sure," she said after a few moments. I haven't performed in a long time. Tonight, it was different. I just felt something calling me. The owner nodded. There's no pressure. The offer is always open. Anytime. Aiko thanked him, appreciating the kindness. People began gathering around, but not in a chaotic way. They asked gentle questions, shared how her performance made them feel, and spoke to her with deep respect. Aiko answered each person softly, never rushing, always listening. Her calm manner made everyone feel comfortable, as if they were speaking with a close friend rather than a gifted musician. Hideo remained nearby, not wanting to interrupt the flow of people, but also not wanting to leave. He seemed to be processing something important. Eventually, when the crowd thinned, he approached Aiko again. Can I ask you something personal? He said. Aiko nodded. Why did you stop performing? Aiko lowered her gaze. Life changed, she said quietly. Someone close to me passed away. After that, my heart felt heavy every time I touched the piano. I tried to keep playing, but it didn't feel right. So I stopped. Hideo's expression softened. I'm sorry, he said gently. Aiko offered a small smile. It is okay. Time teaches us many things. She paused and looked at the piano again. Tonight, when I played, I felt peace. For the first time in years. Hideo nodded slowly. Then I'm glad I challenged you, even if you completely destroyed me on that piano. Aiko laughed, a soft, quiet laugh that seemed to lighten the air around them. It wasn't a competition, she said. Hideo scratched his head awkwardly. Maybe not for you. For me, it definitely was. Aiko looked at him with gentle eyes. Music is not about winning. It is about speaking when words are not enough. Her words reached him deeper than she realized. He glanced around the room. Maybe it's time I remember that too. The lounge slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Some people ordered drinks, others chatted, but the atmosphere stayed unusually warm. It felt like everyone who had witnessed. Aiko's performance was connected by an invisible thread. Aiko stood and bowed politely to the piano, a quiet gesture of respect. Hideo watched her with curiosity. Do you always do that? He asked. It is a habit, Aiko replied softly. The piano has been good to me. I should honor it. Hideo thought about this. Maybe I should start doing that too. Aiko smiled as she prepared to leave. Several people waved or thanked her again. The lounge owner insisted she take a card with his number on it, in case she ever wanted to perform or simply visit again. Outside, the night air was cool. The streetlights reflected on the pavement, glowing like small lanterns. Aiko stood still for a moment, breathing deeply. It felt like the night itself was welcoming her back. Hideo stepped outside too, walking alongside her but keeping a respectful distance. Are you heading home? He asked. Aiko nodded. Yes, it is late. I'll walk with you for a bit, if that's okay. She didn't mind, so they walked together. The streets were quiet, and their steps echoed softly. After a few minutes, Hideo spoke again. You know, I learned something important tonight, he said. I realized how easy it is to think someone is ordinary just because they look quiet or shy. But you reminded me that talent doesn't make noise. It doesn't ask for attention. It just exists quietly until the moment it is needed. Aiko listened without interrupting, and you also reminded me why I started playing music in the first place. Hideo continued. Somewhere along the way, I got stuck in trying to impress people. But you played from your heart. I want to learn how to do that again. Aiko smiled softly. You will, she said. Anyone can if they listen to themselves. He looked at her gratefully. Thank you for everything tonight. Aiko stopped at the corner where their paths separated. She bowed politely. Thank you as well, she said. If you had not challenged me, I might not have played tonight. Sometimes we need a little push from someone, even if the person does not realize they are giving it. Hideo laughed quietly. I guess I did push a little, didn't I? Aiko nodded. A gentle push. Just enough. The wind brushed past them, carrying the distant sounds of the city. Aiko looked peaceful. I think I will play again, she said softly. Not for others. For myself. Hideo's face brightened. I'm really glad to hear that. She stepped back, preparing to leave. Good night, she said warmly. Good night, he replied, as Aiko walked away. Hideo watched her with newfound respect. He realized he had witnessed something rare, a person rediscovering a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. Aiko walked with a lighter step, feeling warmth blooming inside her chest. Music had returned to her life, not through pressure or expectation, but through a simple moment, a challenge meant in fun, a room full of strangers, and a reminder that the heart always remembers what it loves. And though the night slowly swallowed the echoes of her footsteps, the memory of her music remained floating softly in the air, touching everyone who had been there to hear it.